The death penalty has been a problem probably since the first death penalty was issued. It may well be that the most common objection to the death penalty is just entirely wrong. People will say, well, it's so final, it's so irrevocable. I mean, you can't do anything about it afterward. But that's true of any punishment. Whether you rob a child of dessert or whether you imprison someone for 20 years, you can't give back that dessert. You can't give back those 20 years. Yes, it's true, you can't restore these people to life, and maybe that seems like a bigger deal, but in terms of principle, it's the same. What's really important, I think, about the death penalty is, does it match the crime? Why do we do what we do when we kill somebody? Because they've committed a crime. Ernst van den Haag proposes that what's wrong, or what people have suggested is wrong, with the death penalty is that it is issued in a way that is unjust. That is to say, minorities and women get special treatment. Women don't get the death penalty as often as men. Minorities, pick your nationality, pick your world, minorities get it more often than the majority. And van den Haag says that's got nothing to do with the death penalty. That has to do with the legal system. If you're going to say something's wrong with the death penalty, it can't be because of the system that hands it out. It has to be wrong with the death penalty itself. Now, certainly in the United States, the statistics support the charge that men get the death penalty more often than women, that minorities, people of color, people belonging to religious or sexual orientations that are other than the mainstream, are more likely to receive the death penalty than people who are the majority, people who are seen as the mainstream, whatever that means. And van den Haag says, well, okay, but that's the legal system. That's not the death penalty. The penalty itself, I mean, it's not like you put somebody in an electric chair and they're a white cis male. They electrocute just as well as does a gay black woman. The penalty is no different. How it gets assessed may be different, but that's not what's wrong with the penalty. That's what's wrong with the legal system. And in fact, it does turn out that the same persons who are more likely to receive the death penalty are more likely to receive other severe penalties, longer sentences, different accommodations, etc. A prejudiced system, a bigoted system, is a bigoted system. That's not the problem with the death penalty. That's the problem with the system. You may well say, well, then we need to withhold the death penalty until the system gets fixed. Well, okay, sure. But that's not a problem with the death penalty. Okay? All right. Having said all that, let's take a look at what Hugo Bedau has to say. He has an enormous demonstration, an incredible statistics where he demonstrates beyond any shadow of a doubt that these penalties get assessed inappropriately, and I mean inequitably. I don't see how anybody can object to Bedau's conclusion that in the United States at least, these penalties go the death penalty goes to persons of color, persons of foreign birth, persons who are male, way more often, statistically speaking, than it does to the other persons. Fine. Vanden Haag goes, sure. But if the death penalty deters one person from killing somebody else, then it's worth it. The price of one human life is so great that it doesn't matter that other persons aren't executed if we can save one life by executing persons who commit capital offenses. It's worth mentioning, I think, that capital is actually has nothing to do with big buildings or money or anything like that. It has to do with the French word for head. It goes right back to the idea of decapitation. Decapitation, removing the head, so that the axeman, the guillotine, even hanging, these are capital punishments. They're about the head. Okay? Now, going back to the argument here between Bedau and Vanden Haag, Bedau goes, well, okay, I understand what you're saying about keeping people from committing crimes. This idea of causing folks to step away, going, oh, well, but I'll get the death penalty. Well, I understand that you think that's worth it. But one is there's not really that big a demonstration that that kind of prevention actually happens. That's one. And two, the expense associated with it is so great. I mean, look, everybody agrees if you're going to kill somebody, you've got to do an expert job, a complete job, a thorough job of demonstrating that that person actually committed the crime in question, that it was committed the way that they've been convicted for having done it. If you can't do that, then the execution is wrong. And Bedau says, look, there's just no way it equals out. In the end, all the issues involved, all the expenses involved, all the challenges involved, it's just not worth it. It's better to not have the death penalty than to go through all of this rigmarole. I leave that to you. But I will give you Igor Primowitz. He says there are some crimes that are so heinous, the only meet punishment is death. And that raises the whole question again of why do we punish? Why punish anyone ever? I mean, you obviously didn't prevent the death that just happened, or, that led to this execution. So deterrence obviously isn't very helpful. You're not rehabilitating anybody when you kill them. Neither are you actually incapacitating them, taking them out of the community. I mean, yes, they're dead, and obviously they've got, but that's not quite the same thing as imprisonment, is it? I mean, seriously. And then what's left? All that's left is revenge, retribution. And retribution might be right here. But do we want to have a consistent punishment theory? That is, a theory throughout that matches all cases? Because certainly I don't think retribution is behind paying a traffic ticket. I think all that's at issue there is deterrence. It seems to work pretty well. Most people, I think, are good citizens, don't have a whole lot of traffic tickets. It certainly is the way the traffic courts seem to be. Certainly Vanden Haag says the capital punishment works, at least on occasion, as a deterrent. And if it does one time, that's enough. Bedau says it's too expensive, it's too big a drain, too big a punishment to the community at large to face just in order to kill somebody, to maybe deter something. It's a lot to think about. I'd like to bring up two other persons that we've talked about throughout all of our discussion of ethics, John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant. And interestingly, during their lifetimes, both came out in favor of the death penalty. Mill, because the state of prisons was so bad at that time that he considered it to be a mercy to execute someone rather than to force them to live in prison for all of those years. And so he created, as the utilitarian always wants to do, more happiness in an execution than in a life sentence. Kant's argument, as you might imagine, is a little more sophisticated. Kant says, look, we have to treat everyone as though they are both sovereign and subject of the kingdom of ends. When someone kills someone else, they are saying, as sovereign of the kingdom of ends, killing people is the right thing to do. Has to be unqualified, remember, or it's not a categorical imperative. Killing people is the right thing to do. That's what the murderer has said as sovereign of the kingdom of ends. If we are not to treat this person as merely a means, merely as a way to process them through the system, but instead treat them with seriousness and dignity, the way one treats an end in itself, we have to go, well, what is their principle? What is the maxim of the action that they have performed? Well, the maxim of the action is people should be killed. If we're to treat them with the dignity they deserve as sovereign and subject of the kingdom of ends, they must be executed. That's a lot to think about. I hope you're going to talk about it. And I hope you'll keep on talking philosophy.